Hello, I am Sophie. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to a video I thought I could finally make because now I feel like I actually have a decent grip on how to write characters. Have I been writing for like 6 years? Maybe. We're not going to talk about it. Now, to start, as with everything in my writing process, everything I do is just building on what I already have for the project or for the story. Kind of like a rubber band ball. Every rubber band is like a different world building idea or a different plot idea or a different character trait, and we're just building onto it until we have something significant. And more specifically, character work, like actually sitting down and doing character work, is probably the last thing I'm able to do in the writing process, simply because for understanding the characters, I need to understand the world and the kind of story I want to tell the most. I need to know all of that before I can really buckle down and start considering character. But that being said, let's begin. First of all, character sheets. No, no character sheets. Frankly, character sheets are the bane of my existence. I have tried to use them so many times, especially when I was starting to write in like 2019, 2020, because I was seeing those and it looked so cool and I wanted to fill one out for myself, and they never work for me. I can get as far as probably like a character name before giving up, because then it's like, oh, when's their birthday? And I'm like, I don't know when their birthday is. This doesn't even happen on Earth. There's no months, there's no dates. And then everything just falls apart. And this is no hate on people who can use them. They always look cool. I've always wanted to fill one out, but they are not deemed necessary to me and my process. So if you do use them, good on you. Wish I could be like you, but I cannot. So instead of character sheets, what do I use? Essentially, I just use my rough outline for a book, which essentially rough for me pretty much means I know basic setting of where this book will be taking place, i.e. in space or in a small town or in an apocalyptic city, like something like that. And then I know the catalyst, midpoint, and the end of the book. That's pretty much everything. And if I don't know the end, because sometimes I really don't know how the book is going to end, I at least know the final action of the main character or main characters in order to reach an ending that I don't really know yet. But you know, and from knowing those big points that I want to hit, I can then shape the character's beliefs into things that would ultimately lead to these 3 events happening. Maybe that's insane. I feel like many people build off of character and then they're like, okay, given the characters, what would they do? But those 3 main things, those are things I need to happen in the story. So technically, at the basic level, my characters end up being shaped by those 3 main plot points. So given that, I get like a very basic idea of what the characters might believe in, what they want, what they're striving towards, and I can start filling in the gaps between the catalyst, the midpoint, and the end with actions that sort of tweak the timeline, give it that character-driven feel, because it is character-driven, but we ultimately come back to those points that I originally thought of. Or, if that doesn't work, we switch the midpoints, we switch the end. It's gonna happen sometimes, but it doesn't happen very often. Usually what I end up coming up with can stay in the bounds. I don't have a very structured system for this. It's not like there's a set order in which I try to figure this stuff out, but bear with me. Sorry. Now, before we can even get to that part, for me, pretty much, there is the basic character creation process that must occur. This is literally just creating my cast. Whose perspectives are we going to see in the book, and how are they related to each other? That's it. And here, pretty much all I do is figure out their names, which is sometimes the hardest thing to do and the most fun thing to do, especially when in the story you can like add meaning to their name on top of who they already are. Love doing that. And 2, figuring out what these characters look like. This can be kind of abstract sometimes. Like, one of the characters for one of my the newest project I have working up here was a sketch I had referenced from like Pinterest, I think. And it was a guy in like a hog mask or something. I didn't really put much detail or effort, I guess, into making a unique face under the hog mask. It's not really a mask, it's like a hat. I don't know. But then I saw that, and I saw like the kind of energy, the vibe it was giving off, and I was like, that could be a good character. And that ended up being one of the main characters in Project Moonrat, which, if you want to see more about that, I'll link the video. But usually appearance, at least nowadays, starts on Pinterest finding portraits of random people and then putting them all into a board until I figure out what I want this character to look like. These can vary quite widely. There were a couple characters in Project What that I didn't really know what I wanted them to look like because I hadn't drawn them yet. We'll get to that in a second. I would look through their sections in the Project What board and I'm like, what was I doing? These are like 7 completely different people. Like, they look nothing alike, and they're all just in here to represent this one character. So, you know, sometimes I have to go back and delete some and figure out what on earth I was doing. Yeah, Pinterest, just putting together as many references as possible to just try and get an idea of who I'm writing. And then, if I'm feeling particularly inspired, I will draw the characters. This is usually a lot better for me, visually, because what I tend to do when I'm drawing characters is I take the facial features from the portraits I have saved on Pinterest, and I take all my favorite ones and I mash them all into one face. So instead of looking at 5 different references to know what eyes, what hair, what nose, what mouth, what face shape, it's all in one picture and it looks like the character that I'm seeing in my head. That's a lot of work sometimes, especially because I'm not great at drawing from reference. And sometimes, on the rare occasion, I end up knowing what I want the characters to look like without a reference and then just end up drawing them. And another thing about the like very basic character creation process for me is that a lot of the times I'm building sets of characters before I even have a story idea to put them in. Like the Project What characters, I had drawn those 3, like, they were like just busts of 3 people in class one day in high school. And I was like, these are some cool people, maybe I could use these for something. They ended up becoming the Project What characters, my first ever real project that I've ever worked on, so that's cool. The Project Glass characters, which are 2 sisters, started out as just like these 2 random OCs that I ended up drawing one day, and I put them in my sketchbook with like a couple notes on like some basic lore where it's like, oh, this is the older sister, this is the younger sister, the older sister likes this, the younger sister likes this. And I didn't use them for anything until like months later when I ended up coming up with Project Glass. The Project Star characters were just basic little character, not even really character sketches because I didn't intend on them being characters really, but just like, again, just little busts of people that I drew next to some spacesuit sketches I was just brainstorming for fun. Project Star was barely a thing. I think I was like, I want to write a book that's set in space. So I started designing things, but there was nothing real there yet. Now, this is not to say that I'm just constantly creating new characters and like making new sketches and coming up with new OCs that are just like sitting and waiting to be added to a story. Once again, these are pretty contextual. Typically I have like the most basic idea in mind for what I could use these characters in, and they end up being drawn, but there's no real story yet for them. Like Project What, I drew those characters on the idea that they were a group of friends that liked to ride bikes through like an abandoned looking city. Like that was it. That's all I knew. I was like, group of friends, bikes, abandoned city, go. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. And typically these characters are already grouped. They're already like, okay, these 3 are gonna be together. These 2 are gonna be together. Like they're gonna be in a world together. So it's not like I'm just making like random dudes and I'm like, oh, you 3 look cool, come over here. Like there is a little bit of structure into the process, but not a ton. And then during this as well, I try to come up with like a basic belief for each of the characters. This is one single belief that drives them, hopefully. These are really basic, really boring, like super stereotypical, and they only tend to gain nuance once I'm like deep in the outlining process. I don't know, stuff like one character wants to see the world One character wants to get out of the small town they live in. One character wants to live up to her parents' expectations. One guy wants to get the girl. Like, it's very basic. It's extremely. And then at the same time, I try to build like a basic backstory as to how the characters fit into the world that I'm simultaneously building. Like Project What? All the characters are students at this prestigious school at the end of the world. Or like, this is a worker in a space colony, or this is the captain's daughter of a space station, or this is the older sibling and this is the younger sibling. Like, just trying to put them in the world with a purpose and a meaning and a relationship to something, connecting it to the world. As long as I have anything that roots the character into this basic world I've started, and I can tie them into the world and into the outline, the basic character creation process is complete. Now, this is where the real development starts. In outlining and character development. They happen at the same time. Everything happens in the outlining stage for me. I am an outliner heavy. Because I'm building them simultaneously, my outline sort of dictates how my characters behave. As I already said, I have the basic arc I want the story to go through, and I would really love if my characters filled that arc. But also, since I'm developing the characters at the same time as the outline, the characters end up dictating what happens in the outline at the same time. So, outline dictates the characters dictate the outline, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, forever. Essentially, in the most boiled down sense, I would say first comes the basic outline. This is what I want to happen in the story. How are we going to make it happen? Then, using that basic outline, I figure out more about the characters, more about how their basic belief at the beginning of the book will change over time, and how they can use that basic belief to alter the storyline, make it better, make it worse, a little bit of both. And then, using that sort of brainstorming of character belief and them being able to change the story, or how they're able to change the story, we can end up finishing the outline, or at least filling it out a little bit. So as a basic idea for Project Star, I'm gonna read this from my script actually, it's kind of long. Script. Okay, so for Project Star, my basic idea for the project, other than I want a story set in space, was the star that the space station in this story is orbiting is nearing the end of its life. It is becoming unstable, it is becoming dangerous to live near. And the humans in this world need to find a new place to live. And then something ends up happening with the alien species that ends up becoming the antagonist for the remainder of the series. And that something ends up forcing my two main characters to be on the run through the Milky Way galaxy. And then I also had the ending planned out, but I won't spoil that for you guys because it is still the ending. But that was the basic idea. And then, two main characters, as I mentioned. One of them is the daughter of the captain of the space station. The second is a boy who lives by the seat of his pants. And then their motivations. The female main character wants to fulfill her father's expectations. She wants to become the next captain of the space station. And then the male main character wants to find his father, who ended up disappearing on a space mission when he was a child. I know that wasn't mentioned at all in the basic idea, but that is what he wants to do. Now, having those three basic ideas, basic outline, basic character description, basic motivation, we can start to flesh out the outline. Typically at this point, I do have some other points that kind of lead to different clues, because a lot of my stories have like a little mystery element to them, and like they have to gather information before the midpoint and the ultimate like understanding of the book. So typically I already have outlined ways that we can get clues on the way, and at this point, now that I know what the characters want, we can start putting in their own little twists and spins based on what they believe, etc. And also, very important one, is seeing how their motivations and their beliefs begin to shift with each new event that occurs in the outline. Very important. And it is through these changes in motivation and how they possibly push back against this change that the real outline starts to take place, and we get that real drama, the tea, the juice. etc. And typically this is a very slow kind of inchwormy process through my outline, and it is a very like one step at a time. Like first we understand what is happening at this one plot point in this one scene, whatever. We then analyze how this is affecting each character, however many main characters there are, and then through how this affects the characters, we figure out, okay, then how would the characters react to the situation? What would they do? And then based off of what they end up doing, we get the next plot point, and down and down and down we go. Hopefully I'm explaining this well. It's a very back and forth process. It's a very, okay, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then what about this? It's great. It's so fun. Pretty much this just keeps going until the outline is complete, and pretty much simultaneously as the outline is complete, I've begun to understand the characters. If not fully, then a lot better than before. And this is a fairly new process for me. I've really only been able to use it for Project Star and Project Glass, and I definitely will be using it for Project What as I start working on the rest of Draft 4. But for right now, the only two projects I've really been able to use this on is Project Star and Project Glass. And a little bit of Project Moonrat because of the basic brainstorming I was doing, but not a ton. But you may be asking, what about adding character growth and more character drivenness to old drafts? Because like I said, this is a fairly new process and I've been writing for a pretty long time. How do we fix those? This is pretty much just for Project What, not gonna lie. This is my book baby. I've been working on it literally since I started writing. Not full time, clearly, but like as a real dedicated hobby. So she's been through a lot, and lack of character or like strong character is one of those things. So specifically for Project What, I've said this a million times, but Act 1 has always been the problem child for me in the book. I personally think that the characters in Act 2 and Act 3 are solid. I think we can clearly see their motivations, we can clearly see how it's affecting what happens to them and how they affect the world, but Act 1 was not. It was very much a, oh, and we're here, and the characters said this, and then they did this. And it wasn't very deep within the characters. Like, we weren't very deep into their perspectives. It was just more of like floating around, just kind of seeing what they were doing. So essentially what I had to do, at least for Act 1, which if you want full details, go there. All I was doing pretty much was infusing more character into plot points that I already knew, because I like the progression of the plot through the book, and I knew that just with a little more effort it could be a character-driven plot. I just didn't show that. So there was an overhaul of understanding of Act 1 and how we get to certain points. Originally, almost everything just sort of happens by chance. So instead of letting everything happen by chance, I was then going back from just before that plot point and figuring out, okay, instead of this just being handed to the characters, what do they do to lead up to this? So it was kind of working backwards in order to figure out, like, okay, I like this point, I want to keep this point, but how can we get to this point where the characters actually put an effort to get there? Sometimes, yeah, it is working backward. It's like, okay, I want to get to this midpoint. I have a few things before it that I already know, but what else can we do to get to the midpoint? It's a mess. Sometimes we're working forward, sometimes we're working backwards. Don't hit me up. Another thing that was really helpful in reworking Act 1 of Project What was the fact that I already knew what was happening in the rest of the book. Up to the end of Act 1, I knew what point the characters needed to be at emotionally and in their character arcs. So I had an end goal. I had an end goal and a thing I needed to achieve. I just had to work up to that point. It wasn't open-ended where I was like, okay, well, what do I want the characters to feel like at the end? I knew where they had to be, and it wasn't in a very great place. But yeah, that was also another big help, was knowing I had a definitive end for the characters, because we were only a third of the way through the book. And pretty much I found everything I wanted to change while I was rereading. It was kind of all in the story for me, just waiting. It was something that I needed to point out and emphasize in order for it to feel more character driven. Like, when I reread the book, or reread Act 1, I haven't read the whole book yet, and I was trying to figure out how to streamline the character identity more. I was like, it's right here. Everything I could have written to make it more like character driven was all in the book. I just had not made that the main priority in the writing. So everything was there. Everything was there. I just had to move some things around, get rid of some things, add some new things that sort of emphasized everything in order to make these main points the things that we see throughout the book. Anyways, that is it from me. Hopefully that all made sense. I don't know if I did. My process is very weird, but I swear to God, it works, okay? It works for me. Maybe I can't get it across too well, but it has drastically changed how I outline and how hard-hitting I feel my writing ends up being. And if I left anything out that you want to know about, please ask below. This video might have been a little confusing. I can admit that. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I am down to answer them. Also, let me know of any processes you have for developing characters. I have only recently figured out how to really develop characters besides just drafting and hoping for the best. So any new method is welcome. I'd love to know. So let me know in the comments, and hope to see you in the next one. Peace. Wow.